Introduce our speaker. I present to you Christopher Malagisi. Chris is currently the National Grassroots Coordinator here at the Institute. He was recently the National Youth Director for the Friends of Fred Thompson presidential campaign, and he was previously a Regional Director for the Republican Party of Virginia. Chris has published various op-eds on public policy and has been published by the International Conference on Social Sciences. Now to introduce our excellent speaker, Chris Malagisi.
Thank you, Morton. It was my honor and privilege to introduce Ed Gillespie to everybody today. And, you know, for many of us, Mr. Gillespie is one of the most prominent, successful Republican strategists in the country, and we've seen him a lot. And in a way, we kind of don't even need an introduction, but at the same time, I'm going to try my best to give him an introduction, but he's done pretty much everything. Thank you. I'm kidding. Mr. Gillespie currently serves as counselor to the President of the United States, and more recently, before that, was the chairman of the Republican National Committee from July 2003 to January 2005. And I think we could say that was one of the most successful tenures ever of a chairman before. Mr. Gillespie was born in Brownsville, New Jersey, and is a graduate of the Catholic University of America in Washington, D.C. While he was at Catholic University, he started his Capitol Hill career as a high-profile Senate parking lot attendant. But he quickly moved up the ranks and climbed the political ladder to be a nighttime telephone solicitor in the bowels of the RNC at the headquarters. But he quickly later moved on and for a decade worked for House Majority Leader at the time, Dick Armey, and was one of the principal drafters of the GOP's 1994 contract with America. In 1996, he was Director of Communications and Congressional Affairs for the RNC under then Chairman Haley Barbour. And in the year 2000, Gillespie served as Senior Communications Advisor for the presidential campaign of George W. Bush, organized the party convention that was held in Philadelphia that year, and also played an aggressive role as one of his spokesmen during the 2000 Florida recount. He also, in 2002, was the chief strategist for Elizabeth Dole's Senate campaign in North Carolina, and it was one of the most expensive Senate races in the history at that time. In 2005, we saw Mr. Gillespie help lead and usher Chief Justice John Roberts through the Senate confirmation hearings, as well as assist Justice Sam Alito as well. Mr. Gillespie was also chairman of the Republican Party of Virginia from December 2006 to June 2007. I know some of you may be thinking that, wow, that's interesting. A Republican national chairman became a state party chairman, and typically that's not how usually you work your way up. But I remember listening to Mr. Gillespie talk about why he made this decision, and I think those of us who live in Virginia know that politics has been trending into not a non-conservative way. And Mr. Gillespie said at the time, you know, I realize we need to have conservative leadership. We need to be able to build the grassroots effort. That's the most important element in any type of campaign. It doesn't matter if you're the national chairman or a state chairman. We all have to play a part. Just something that I remember and stuck out in my head. Also an author, he wrote the book Winning Right, Campaign Politics and Conservative Policies, and it was released in September 2006. He and his wife and 3 children live in Fairfax County at the time, right now. And I just want to tell just a little brief story about how I actually met Mr. Gillespie. Back in 2005, when I made my foray into Virginia politics, I was a lone volunteer down in the Mount Vernon district of Fairfax County, and it was for the 2005 GOP primary. Not necessarily. It was kind of an exciting time, but at that day there was only about 100 people at this precinct, and it was hot, very hot. I turned 3 shades of red that day, but I was very excited when it was getting close to 7 o'clock. It was time to go home, and I was looking at my watch and picking up my pamphlets that I was supposed to hand out, and it was 6:59, and all of a sudden I hear, as I'm bending over to pick up something, there is this man. And he is running like a bat out of heck. And it almost knocks me over, and I'm like, what is going on here? And there was a candidate who was running for a state delegate over there, and he goes, oh, that's Chairman Ed Gillespie there. He's got to get in there before the voting stops. It'd be an interesting PR thing if he wasn't able to vote in the GOP primary. But I think it just shows Mr. Gillespie's zealous dedication to the conservative movement, and where he is now is very impressive, and again, one of the most prominent, successful strategists in the Republican Party. So it's my honor and privilege to introduce Ed Gillespie.
Thank you, Chris, very much, and thank you all for letting me be with you this morning. It's great to be back at the Leadership Institute with my friend and a mentor, Morton Blackwell. Even better to be back with Helen. And Chris mentioned that I did serve as chairman of the Republican National Committee. I'm very proud of that. I also served as chairman of the Republican Party of Virginia. I was only able to serve for a short time before the president asked me to serve in the White House, and I answered that call. But it is true that it's not the normal trajectory to go from national party chairman to state party chairman. It's worth noting, however, that Morton nominated me for both positions. He nominated me for chairman of the Republican National Committee back in 2003, and he nominated me again to be chairman of the Republican Party of Virginia last year. And I'll always thank him for that. And when I rise to the level of precinct captain, I'm going to ask him to nominate me for that, too. The fact is, I did want to visit with you all this morning about elections and ideas. And elections are a contest of ideas. I appreciate all of you. I've signed copies of my book, Winning Right, which was, by the way, a bestseller. In November of 2005, it made it on the top 10 bestseller list in the Washington Post hardback nonfiction regional bestseller list. And so this goes to show you, if you slice anything thin enough, you can make the top 10. But it got great reviews, even if it didn't sell all that great, and I hope you enjoy it. And there's some great stories in there, some great lessons. Chris mentioned my work for Elizabeth Dole, which I'm very proud of. She is in cycle again in North Carolina. She's done a great job for the people of North Carolina, and a very good senator, and she'll be reelected, I think, easily. But her first contest was not an easy election. It was a vigorous contest and one of the most expensive in the country in the 2002 cycle. She ran against Erskine Bowles, who had been Bill Clinton's chief of staff and had a ton of money from the left coming into the state, and all the MoveOn.org folks are pouring money in there. And but she turned out to be a great candidate. And I always remember Bob Dole giving me some great advice when I first accepted the position of being her general strategist in that election. And Bob Dole told me a little bit about working with Elizabeth Dole. He said, you know, Ed, if you say yes to Elizabeth early, you'll save yourselves both a lot of time. Which turned out to be true, because she is a woman of great conviction and hard-charging, and has done a great job. And I was proud to have worked for her. I'm very proud of my work for the House Republican Conference, and Dick Armey for more than 10 years, as from his rise from his first month in office as a freshman legislator who was barely known. In fact, he likes to tell the story about in his first election in 1984, the Reagan landslide year, that he did his first poll. And his name ID was 3%, with a margin of error of plus or minus 5%. So he wasn't even sure if his children knew his name at that point. But he went on to become the first Republican majority leader in 40 years on a platform of ideas known as the Contract with America. And I was very proud to have played a small role in that, and now very proud to serve as counselor to President Bush in what is a very important time in our nation's history. And your involvement is critically important, because ideas have consequences, and elections have consequences. We see that all the time. We see it as we look at the United States House of Representatives today and the United States Senate today. We'll see it in this election year. And elections and politics are the realm in which the ideas that have consequences translate into action. And that's why I think it's so important, and I wanted to be here with you today, because your involvement is very important. I'm a big believer in a bottom-up party and in the grassroots. That is why I went to head up the Republican Party of Virginia. Virginia is a very important state, as my friend Jay O'Brien knows, and is moving away from us. And if we don't stop that slide, it's going to be tough to get it back. We've seen that. I came from New Jersey. And moved to Virginia, over 15 years ago. and I escaped New Jersey as it was becoming a very Democratic and very blue state to come to a happy, healthy, safe red state of Virginia. And I don't want to see Virginia go the way of New Jersey. And so this contest of ideas is right here in Virginia and across the country. It's upon us. And those of us who believe in a conservative philosophy, in the need for limited government and more freedom, and greater personal responsibility, and strong national security, have to be engaged in this contest of ideas. And I believe that, as is often the case, usually the case when we present these ideas properly, we will prevail, because a majority of Americans agree in a philosophy of strong national security, limited government, personal responsibility, and recognizing the values that have made us great as a country. And I want to talk a little bit about some of those and some of those differences that we face on those three areas when it comes to taxes and spending and who controls our money and our investments, when it comes to values issues and matters of culture and keeping our culture strong, and when it comes to national security and winning in a new kind of war, the global war on terror. And I think as you look at those three issue sets, we're right and they're wrong, and we need to make the case as to average Americans who aren't as involved as we are as to why it's in their interest to support the conservative candidates in these elections. And let's start with budget and taxes. The fact is, the pundits in 2001 and 2003, when President Bush, with the help of a Republican Congress, passed tax relief for working Americans and American families, and passed tax relief on investment income, dividend income, and capital gains tax relief, the pundits said that that was going to be a disaster. The New York Times said this is the exact wrong direction to foster economic growth. And they were wrong. The fact is that the more people had money to spend on their own decisions in their own lives, the more investors had to put into our businesses for job creation, the better off we were. And the fact is, revenue to the federal treasury last year, as a result of the economic growth that came about because of the tax relief, was at the highest level in the history of our country. There's more federal revenue coming into the treasury today than there ever has been in the history of the United States of America. And so we have plenty of money to spend in Washington. We don't need to raise taxes in order to get more money. That's not the issue. And we have proven, as was proven, by the way, under John F. Kennedy, and as was proven under Ronald Reagan, and was proven again under George Bush, when you cut taxes and allow people to invest and hire and create economic growth, revenues to the federal treasury go up. It's important how we spend that money. And I'm going to come to that in a second, but I just want to talk real quickly about the short-term relief that we need to enact right now, which is an economic growth package, a temporary and timely economic growth package that will address some of the concerns in the economy today. Much of that concern comes from the market adjusting in the housing market, and there's been a lot of pressure on the administration to intervene in the housing market and to stop housing prices from going down somehow through government intervention. That would be the exact wrong policy, and the fact is that in a free market economy, prices go up and prices go down. And that happens with houses as well as with cars and with other things in our marketplace. And so this is an adjustment that's going on right now in various markets across the country. It's not a pleasant adjustment, but the idea that the federal government should somehow intervene, as has been suggested, to artificially inflate the prices of housing and houses in the country is not the right approach. We do believe, however, that we're seeing the economy slowing in other areas, and we need to guard against that. And again, taking an approach that allows people to keep more of their hard-earned money to spend in the economy, we think is the right approach. And so the President is supporting a very rare agreement between John Boehner and Nancy Pelosi. It needs to move through the Senate quickly. They shouldn't derail it or delay it. And the sooner we can get that into the hands of the people, the better off we'll be. And after that's done, we need to make the tax relief permanent that was passed in 2001 and 2003. The biggest thing in terms of long-term economic growth is removing that uncertainty for 116 million Americans that come 2010, their taxes are going to go up. As the President noted in the State of the Union, some people say that allowing a tax cut to expire is not the same as a tax increase. Well, try telling that to people who are going to pay an average of $1,800 more a year in federal taxes. And then he noted that some people say, well, they're happy personally to see taxes go up. And as he reminded them, the IRS accepts both checks and money order. Go ahead and send it in, but we're not going to make a federal issue of it. The fact is we need to keep that tax relief low. And so there's a very clear difference in approach. Every one of the Democrats seeking the Democratic Party nomination is for higher taxes, and every one of the Republicans seeking the party's nomination is for lower taxes. And that's a very significant difference. How we spend the money, the people's hard-earned money, is an important distinction as well. And the fact is that the President urged the Congress last year to meet a goal of reducing earmarks in half, cutting them in half in this last session of Congress. Congress didn't do that, and because the Congress didn't do that, he now in the State of the Union has made clear to Congress that should they not cut earmarks in half in any bill that they send to his desk from last year's levels, he will veto that legislation. We're not going to accept these earmarks being put into bills. We need to bring them down and bring them down by half again. More importantly, he's signed an executive order that makes it the law of the land that earmarks that are put into conference committee reports, those that are not actually voted up or down on the floor of the House and Senate and signed by the President, will not be implemented by federal departments and agencies. Now, not only will that be the case during the last year of the Bush presidency, it is the case forever unless a president repeals that executive order. And so any president from here on out, if they want to repeal an executive order that bans the practice of airdropping earmarks and directives to federal agencies, they will have to accept responsibility for every earmark going forward. I don't think it's the kind of thing that any president, regardless of party, is likely to do. So I think we have taken some important steps in ending the practice of earmarking in Congress. I don't know if we'll ever completely eradicate it, but we have curbed it effectively right now. One other good example, I think, by the way, of the importance of the contest of ideas, the President was roundly criticized in the media and derided if you saw the nightly news and the editorials about children going without health care because of the so-called S-chip plan, the state children's health insurance proposal, which the President supported continuing and covering those who are currently covered. The Democratic Congress wanted to not only continue that program, but expand it and extend it, not only to children above 200% of poverty who didn't have insurance, but to cover children who were already covered by private insurance, to take them off of private insurance coverage and put them onto government insurance coverage. And to do so would have raised taxes on tobacco. They always pick one of the most popular tax increases to start the tax increase bonanza. And the President held firm. And House Republicans, by the way, withstood a barrage of negative media in their district saying that they were heartless and thoughtless and didn't care about children's health, which is nonsense. And so the bill was extended. It does cover the currently covered population. No one went without health insurance who already had it. But we were able to stop what was, I think, the first step, and what Democrats smartly saw as the first step, to government-run health care. If you can raise taxes to pay for children who already have private health insurance, to put them into a government health insurance program, you are well on your way to having government health care for everyone, which is not in the interest of our country. It would have a terrible impact on the quality of care and on the fact that we are the greatest country in the world when it comes to innovation in medicine. And so that was a very important philosophical fight, and it was what allowed the President to prevail at the end of the year with the Democrat Congress over their desire to spend more and raise taxes, and they were unable to do that. So these debates are very important, and we'll see them play out in November as well in the general election. When it comes to cultural issues, once again, there are some clear examples here of where those on the left and in the media and the pundits and the analysts and the commentators, when President Bush took a principled stand for life and refused to allow government funding for embryonic stem cell research that destroyed human life, he was roundly criticized. and derided as being backwards and opposed to science, and he drew a very important ethical line. And now we see that just recently the research shows that you can reprogram adult skin cells to act as embryonic stem cells and get essentially the same effect in terms of the research, and do so in an ethical way. And the fact is, the President is going to, for the first time, fund that research with federal money through the National Institutes of Health. But we saw, again, where the pundits and the experts and the New York Times were wrong, and the conservative philosophy and the principled philosophy was right. These issues are very important when it comes to judges, for example. And Chris mentioned that I was helpful in getting Chief Justice John Roberts confirmed. It was one of the most exciting and interesting times of my life. I was lucky to get my undergraduate degree from Catholic University. Never went to law school, but I learned a lot about the Constitution from John Roberts in the course of our 5 months together working on his confirmation, and Justice Alito. And if you don't think elections have consequences, think about what the Supreme Court would be like if John Kerry had been president when those two vacancies came up, and think about these 5-4 decisions we're starting to see and where they would be coming down. And it's likely whoever is elected in November will have the same opportunity the President had to appoint at least one and maybe two Supreme Court justices in a way that could reshape the court for well over a generation. And so that is a very important aspect of this coming election. We hope that before the end of the President's term that the United States Senate will give the judges to the district and appellate courts, the federal courts, fair votes in the United States Senate. I see some of my fellow Catholics with Ashes for Ash Wednesday. I gave up cigars for Lent, by the way, and I'm hoping that the Senate Democrats will give up obstructionism for the next 40 days and maybe move some of our good qualified judicial nominees, people who apply the law as written, don't make it up from the bench. Very important that they get that done. The third area where there are very important differences and where ideas have consequences and elections have consequences are when it comes to our safety, to our national security, and to the security of this country. And the fact is, when it comes to winning and prevailing in a global war on terror, the President's approach is right. If we are not on offense and fighting them in places like Kabul and Riyadh, we will be on defense and fighting them in places like Virginia and New York. And so the President is right about this issue. His policies have kept us safe since September 11. It is not for lack of trying that the terrorists have not attacked us on our own home soil since the attacks of September 11, 2001. And in fact, if you would ask people on October 11, 2001, the likelihood that our country would suffer another attack in the course of the next 7 years, a vast majority of Americans would have said that it's highly likely. And it's because of the President and his policies and his commitment to winning the war on terror that we have not been. And I don't say that lightly, because every day is another test of our ability to do so. If you saw the testimony yesterday from Director of National Intelligence Mike McConnell and CIA Director General Hayden, we are safer as a country, but we are not yet safe. And the fact is, if we allow these policies that have kept us safe to lapse, for example, the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act that is pending before the United States Senate and that expires in 2 weeks unless the Senate acts, we will be less safe as a nation. It is as a result of those programs that we have been able to disrupt terrorist plots against America, to be able to intercept conversations and planning and plotting between suspected foreign terrorists abroad. It does not abridge the rights, civil liberties of American citizens here at home, and it needs to be enacted. And doing anything less than that makes us more vulnerable as a country. And the President will continue to make this case to have the Senate and the House continue to enact the FISA bill. The fact is, the spread of freedom is important because it affects the atmosphere where the terrorists have been able to recruit young people. If there is despair and hatred sown in these areas where there's not freedom, we are more likely to face more enemies. And the President is right to promote in Iraq a free and stable Iraq in the heart of the Middle East. And we are seeing progress on that front. It's so interesting that, again, you see the coverage of the need for a de-Baathification law in Iraq. The media constantly noting that this is a key benchmark that has to get done. And once it gets done, what do they say? Oh, well, it's not a good de-Baathification law. And they're critical of the Iraqis for the bill that they passed. I know how the Iraqis feel. That's the way they are of everything that we've passed over the past 8 years in the United States. But the fact is they are making progress, and the surge is working. And those who said that the war was lost, those who said that it's not worth fighting, are wrong, and they're being proven more wrong every day. And we also obviously have to prevail in Afghanistan, and the President was right to boost our troop strength there. So when it comes to our national security and who's going to keep us safer as a country, when it comes to who's going to protect our values that we hold dear and promote a culture of life in this country, and who's going to make us more prosperous as a nation and continue to create jobs and to increase productivity and create not only jobs but wealth creation as well in the United States of America, it is the party with the conservative ideas that are right and the party with the liberal big government ideas that are wrong. And it's important that we get involved and we make that case in this election year. We have to do twice as well at it as our friends on the other side of the aisle, because we don't have the media, we don't have the New York Times and the Washington Post and CNN and ABC and NBC and CBS, promoting those ideas every day. We have to do it through email, through conversations at the water coolers, through paid advertising, which is why they're constantly trying to curtail our ability to get our message out. It's important that we stay involved. It's more important on our side, frankly, than it is on theirs. And I would say to the young people here who are getting involved, you will love your involvement. It is politics and government service are fantastic meritocracies. The fact is, as Chris mentioned, my first job in government was parking cars on the Senate parking lot. And my first job in politics was as a phoner in the basement of the RNC. I would go in, and they would put me in a little cubicle down in the dark basement, and I would call people at home and interrupt their dinner and bother them for money for the Republican Party. And 18 years later, I was elected chairman of the Republican National Committee, and I had this big office up on the top floor with a beautiful view of the Capitol, nicely lit, and I would sit up there all day, and I would call people at home and bother them for money for the Republican Party. I'd come full circle. But the fact is, my parents never had the benefit of a college education. Two of the smartest people I've ever known, but they didn't have the benefit of going to college. My father is an Irish immigrant. He came here on a boat, was processed through Ellis Island, fought for his adopted country valiantly, won a Purple Heart, a Bronze Star, and a Silver Star in World War II. He instilled in us, his children, the first generation of Gillespies to ever attend college, a love for our country, and a sense of patriotism and commitment. Now I was not only chairman of one of the two major parties in this great country, but I serve at the side of the President of the United States as his counselor. And it is that is a testament to our country, as my friend Don King would say, only in America. And so I applaud you for getting involved. Stay involved, because it matters and it makes a difference. And it makes a difference in control and management and government of the greatest country that has ever graced the face of the earth by virtue of God's grace and love for us. So thank you for being involved, and thank you for letting me be with you this morning. I'm happy to take questions. Thanks a lot.
Yeah, hi, my name is Howard Wooldridge, retired police detective from Fort Worth, Texas. This is the century of 9/11, and I'm concerned that today hundreds of my colleagues, DEA and FBI agents, are in various states around the country searching for and destroying medical marijuana gardens. It would seem more reasonable that these agents should be investigating leads on people learning how to fly an airplane but not learning how to land, etc. Why does the United States government continue in the century of 9/11 to spend precious resources in law enforcement chasing these medical marijuana gardens?
Howard, I don't believe that that is a zero-sum game. I think we can do both. I think that we can enforce our drug laws and we can keep America safer and through Homeland Security. And the fact is, another area where the president was derided was on his drug policies and the crackdown on use of drugs. He set a goal at the beginning of his term to reduce drug use by 25% during the course of his presidency. And the fact is, at the end of the 5 years, we were able to reduce drug use by 24%. Marijuana use down, cocaine use down, methamphetamine use down, all down dramatically as a result of the president's efforts. And so I think it's important that we send a signal to our young people. I have a 17-year-old son, a 15-year-old daughter, and an 11-year-old daughter, and I am constantly sending them signals that drug use is wrong, that they need to steer clear of it and avoid it. I think it's important that the federal government reinforce that message, and the fact is we can do both. We can fight illegal drugs and fight terrorism at the same time. That's it.
Wes Vernon, the column.
Yes, thank you very much. And you may have heard the President in the State of the Union address that he gave last Monday, where he called for the need to allow students who are trapped in failing public schools, largely in inner cities in this country, the opportunity to go to non-public schools, parochial schools. At the same time we have this problem with children trapped in failing schools, we have at the same time a national asset rapidly disappearing, and that is the parochial school system in this country, the Catholic school system in this country, where they are shutting doors of Catholic elementary schools across the country at an alarming rate. And the fact is, these are two problems that could help solve one another if we were to allow for Pell Grants for children, as the President called for. We have a program now where you can get a Pell Grant, and you can go to Notre Dame with that Pell Grant. You can go to Yeshiva with that Pell Grant. You can go to Penn State with that Pell Grant. You're not prescribed from going to the college of your choice because you received a Pell Grant. If we were to allow children to have the benefit of Pell Grants, those who are trapped in failing schools after 5 years of not getting passing marks, they would be allowed to go to charter schools, non-public charter schools, parochial schools, or other schools that would address some of these concerns. And so I'm hopeful that Congress will, actually I shouldn't say I'm hopeful, I wish Congress would enact that and give folks a chance, but the Teachers Union, as you know, is one of the most influential forces inside the Democrat Party, so they're likely to try to oppose that.
Ed, you as a master strategist would know as well as anybody that a very important ingredient in victory by a political party is morale. Mm-hmm. The Republican Party at the moment, at the grassroots and elsewhere, has a morale problem, and I wish you would try to address three issues that contribute to that. One is immigration. There are many in the party who believe all we're doing with illegal immigration is importing future Democrats because the Democrat Party has run out of victims. On the other hand, the President and other members of the Republican Party say if we keep on beating up, their words, on illegals, we'll bring that to a self-fulfilling prophecy. Secondly, we have a front runner who is cordially disliked by a huge slice of the base because he's seen as being at war with the conservative movement, and are convinced if he does win in November, he'll be the last Republican president. And third, we have states, including red states, including this state of Virginia, who are trending purple because of changes in demographics. And that has a lot of Republicans down in the dumps. Please tell us what can be done to remedy that.
Let me start with immigration, because this is a very important issue and a very difficult issue and an emotional issue. It's more pronounced in the Republican Party than on the Democrat side, partly because we're willing to try to solve it and to reach a solution here that does address illegal immigration, which is a real problem in our country. I believe that we can be a nation of laws and a nation of immigrants at the same time. But people who come here need to come here and obey our laws, and they need to come here and become Americans. The fact is, when my father came from Ireland and settled in Philadelphia, his father, by the way, was a janitor. My father started as a janitor. He was a salesman for Procter & Gamble. He sold Morton Salt. He eventually bought his own grocery store, a mom and pop grocery store that I grew up in, J&C Market, J&C being Jack and Connie, and he eventually lived every Irishman's dream and bought his own bar. But the fact is, as I mentioned, he was a great patriotic American who served his country and sacrificed for his country, sacrificed the calves of both his legs in the Battle of the Hurtgen Forest, and instilled in us a sense of patriotism. We're Americans, and when my father was growing up, his mother would not let him or his brothers or sisters speak with a brogue, because Americans don't talk with brogues. Well, Americans don't speak Spanish in ordinary life either, and we need to have people assimilate when they come to this country and become Americans. And so I think assimilation is really one of the things that we have to address. I think Americans have, in many ways, a greater concern over the lack of assimilation than they do over immigration. And so I think we need to encourage people to come to this country. We're the greatest country in the world. It's not a surprise to me that people want to come here. And the fact is, we ought to let people come here if they're going to come here and contribute to our economy and contribute to our society and become good Americans. And that is an important value for us to hold. At the same time, when you come here by virtue, the first thing you do to come here is break our laws. That's not a great way to start off as a good American. And so we need to secure our borders. We need to enforce the security of our borders. But we can't just build a wall. We need to build a gate as well, and to find ways to let people come here legally, a rational, sane system to do that, and to encourage assimilation. And I think that we can do both. And I think if we do it right, we won't bring in a generation of Democrats. We'll bring in a generation of Republicans. The fact is, many of those immigrant, where I grew up, by the way, my first job in politics, it's not on my bio, was for working for a Democrat member of Congress. Now, he's a conservative Democrat, a Reagan Democrat, Andy Ireland of Florida, and he became a Republican, and so did I. But where I was born, I was born in New Jersey to an Irish Catholic family. In 1961, the year John F. Kennedy was sworn in as the first Irish Catholic president in our country's history, they all but stamped Democrat on my birth certificate. But I'm a Republican now, as are many of my generation of Irish and Italian and Polish Americans. And the fact is, many of these folks who come here from another country, who are Hispanic, bring with them a lot of the values we share. They are entrepreneurial, they are strongly family-oriented, they are pro-life, and they are community-oriented. And I believe that if we were to reach out and have a sane, rational system that allows for us to bring in people who are going to contribute to our economy, become good Americans, we can bring them not only into the country, but into the Republican Party. So I think we need to address this issue. And I do have a fear that what a lot of them hear often is not that we are pro-legal immigration, but that as a party we are anti-immigration. Now, I know that's not fair, and I know that it's the left's desire to portray us that way, but we help reinforce it sometimes, some of the voices in our party. And if we do that, and you look at the Electoral College, and you look at New Mexico, and Colorado, and Nevada, and Arizona and Florida, if we recede from the president's 44% of the Hispanic vote in 2004 to Bob Dole's 26% of the Hispanic vote in 1996, you cannot show me an electoral college map that gets the Republican nominee a majority of electoral college votes. And so I think we have to address this as a party and address it very carefully. In terms of our frontrunner, which I think after last night that's a fair assessment, I just want to say again, we have, I guess 4 candidates on our side who are running for our party's nomination and 2 on their side running for their party's nomination. Whichever of those 4 Republican candidates gets the party's nomination, we're focused right now on the differences between, mostly the 2 or 3 inside the party, and there are differences, and there are important differences.